Hello guys! Tonight we begin with the awful, risky, and not so glamorous world of medieval assassins. Those shadowy figures who crept through castle halls and darkened alleys to trade history with a blade and a whisper. While Hollywood makes them look cool, the fact is being a medieval assassin seriously sucked. So earlier than you get comfortable, take a moment to just like the video and subscribe. However, best in case you without a doubt enjoy what I do here. And let me realize inside the comments wherein you are tuning in from and what time it's miles for you. It's always fascinating to peer who is joining us from around the sector. Now dim the lights, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle historical past hum, and allows ease into tonight's journey together. Let's be clear. No person in medieval instances woke up and said, "You know what? I'd like to stab a nobleman within the throat for 12 silver coins, and the honor of hiding in a barrel for 3 days." Becoming an assassin wasn't a profession path. It turned into greater like a last stop at the life went horribly wrong train. Most medieval assassins weren't mysterious loners trained in mountaintop temples. They had been desperate peasants, disgraced infantrymen, ex-thieves with respectable aim, or humans up to now off society's radar. They might kill a person and still not be observed within the census. If you were properly off, you failed to come to be an assassin. You hired one. If you had to identify, land, or maybe a goat on your call, you were in control. But in case you just escaped Data's prison, had a popularity for solving issues, and could sneak into a tavern without being seen, congratulations. A person someplace became approximately to slip a coin purse across the table and whisper a call. And that call wasn't a fun one. You were not requested to take out Bob the quiet turnip farmer. It was always a corrupt baron, a bishop with an excessive amount of gold, or a person with 12 bodyguards and a moat. The pay. Tempting. The job. Frightening. But by the time someone considered it, they had nothing left to lose. No own family, no future, and truly no dental plan. Plus, let's now not forget absolutely the loss of job perks. No pension, no glory, no evenings off. You could not precisely grasp up a shingle that said, "Quiet eliminations by way of appointment." You just needed to live quiet, pass fast, and never ever tell anyone what you probably did for a living, specifically not loudly over ale on the inn. "Oh yeah, I'm a visiting carpet seller." The stains. Lie. Die. So yes, no person dreamed of being a medieval assassin. They landed there because the arena chewed them up and spat them out wearing a hood and keeping a rusty dagger. You were not the hero. You were not even the villain. You have been the footnote that made all of us frightened and likely didn't live to experience the coin. Allows burst the primary fantasy huge open. Medieval assassins failed to teach under candlelight in a few hidden monastery, with smart mentors and inspirational flute music within the historical past. There has been no montage, no trainer, no pep speak. In case you found out something, it changed into by way of now not demise the primary few times you attempted. Most assassins weren't skilled specialists. They were desperate amateurs with a decent sense of direction and the capacity to climb quietly without sneezing. If you had Navy Revel in, great. That meant you knew a way to maintain a knife properly. If now not, well, stabbing someone is reasonably intuitive, but escaping in a while with both kidneys still intact. That takes ability or success. Usually just luck. There were no manuals, no guild orientation conferences, no safety briefings. You didn't get taught how to spot a body double or where nobles keep their bedroom exits. You figured it out even as striking from a window sill, wondering in case you just crept into the servants' quarters again. Poison. That changed into trial and error, with heavy emphasis on errors. Now and then it labored. Sometimes your target just got mildly dizzy and extra suspicious of his soup. Sometimes you drank the wrong cup. There was no medieval poison control hotline. Just wish, natural guesswork, and a sturdy belly. Positive, if you were fortunate, and I imply lottery lucky, you might have picked up a few talents from thieves or mercenaries. Perhaps an older murderer confirmed you the way to walk without squeaking on cobblestones. However, mentoring wasn't widespread. It turned into rare and short-lived due to the fact assassins do not retire. They disappear. Guns training. Forget about it. You weren't carrying a broadsword. You had a dagger you stole off a protect, perhaps a garrote if you had been feeling fancy, and anything else healthy below your cloak without jingling. So no, you were not a few shadowy martial arts grasp. You were a man with calloused fingers, quiet footsteps, and a deeply unhealthy courting with alleyways. Achievement failed to come from education. It came from survival. You discovered how to kill by doing it quick, sloppily, then vanishing earlier than all people should sketch your face and tack it to a church door. In short, your education became brutal, sensible, and presented zero graduation ceremonies. Just bruises, blood stains, and the creeping attention that you have been very a good deal in your very own. Permits speak about why you became an assassin in the first vicinity. Coin. Bloodless, heavy, jangly, deliciously spendable coin. The promise of it is what got you into this. But the reality. You obtain paid in lies. When a person hires an assassin, they don't want a long time period courting. They need a one-time service, no paperwork, and ideally no witnesses, including you. They offer you a pouch of silver, 1/2 now, half whilst the job is completed. This is if they're feeling generous. But here's the element. Whilst the activity is carried out is code for, when we verify you did not mess it up or make us appearance horrific, or go away a trail that leads back to us, or survive lengthy sufficient to tell all people about it. So that you do the process. You sneak via shadows, risk your existence, perhaps kill a baron in his sleep. No longer quite, no longer poetic. And whilst you return, ah yes, about that payment. The customer fled. Terribly sorry. Or worse, they are attempting to kill you. A knife to the intestine is less expensive than an advantage. Or even whilst you do get paid, it's in no way pretty enough. No longer for the chance, no longer for the blood, not for the 3 days you spent hiding in a haystack with fleas and moral regret. You get a handful of cash, a curt nod, and a reminder you were in no way right here. Additionally, fun fact, a few contracts were faux. Political traps. You would be instructed to assassinate a person dangerous, most effective, to find out it became a decoy with guards waiting. Congratulations. You just walked into a sting operation, along with your name already carved at the gallows. And even when the deal became actual, you couldn't precisely go to court and file a grievance. Your Honor, I'd like to sue Lord Edmund for breach of murderer agreement. The only courtroom you'd see was the only wherein you had been the exhibit. So that you learn to take what you may, call for charge in advance, and believe absolutely no person. Now not even the greasy little scribe who swore this activity would exchange your existence. It did, often through shortening it. Being a murderer supposed living on broken promises and vanishing before they broke you. So you have taken the task. You've been lied to about the pay. You're in all likelihood going to die. Now let's talk gear. Forget about the myth novels and sneaky video games. There had been no retractable wrist blades, smoke bombs, enchanted daggers, or crossbows that folded neatly into your boot. Your toolkit consisted of something you can scouse borrow, sharpen, or hide below a tattered cloak without clanking. In case you were fortunate, and I suggest discovered a gold coin in a dead man's shoe, lucky, you had a good dagger. Not ornate, no longer curved like a dragon's enamel. Just sharp, with a bit of luck rust unfastened, and preferably one that failed to smell just like the ultimate guy you stabbed with it. Poison. It existed, certain. However, it wasn't as glamorous as a sluggish drip right into a wine goblet. Maximum medieval poisons had been unpredictable, made from plant life, minerals, or toad guts. A few labored immediately. Some took hours. Some made your victim vomit for 2 days, after which recover, angrier, and now very suspicious of stew. Ropes. Every so often beneficial. You could strangle, climb, or tie something up with one, but you would know how to use it fast due to the fact nothing kills the mood like looking to wrestle a person whilst muttering, "Wait," which not goes under again. Bows. Effective, sure, in case you had one, knew a way to shoot it, and weren't trying to smuggle it through a palace disguised as a flower arranger. Most assassinations had been up close and personal. No time for fashionable marksmanship, just quick, quiet, and hopefully not messy sufficient to slide in. And you failed to get backups. In case your blade bent, broke, or fell down, a nicely timed to improvise. Slate roof tile, perhaps. Rusty nail. Worth a shot. Shoe buckle with reason. Determined instances. You carried your tools hidden in hems, boots, or inside hollowed-out bread if wished, and also you saved them near, now not for safety, but because on this line of work, your weapon become your satisfactory buddy, your boss, and your only retirement plan. There had been no improvements, no tinkering with gear among missions. You did not polish your package. You prayed it did not betray you mid-strike, because in the end, it wasn't the weapon that did the killing. It became you by alone, poorly equipped, and expected to carry out miracles with a spoon and a prayer. Assassins weren't employed to take out random drunks in back alleys. No person paid you to stab Jeff, the sleepy candle maker. Your targets had been crucial. Nobles, bishops, navy officers, sometimes even royalty. And those human beings, they have been very hard to kill. First, there had been the guards. Not one or two, dozens. Armed, armored, and well-fed. Some guarded the front, a few the back. A few just stood there searching, intimidating, daring you to blink wrong. You'd spend days memorizing patrol patterns, door creaks, and exactly how many stairs it took earlier than the night watchman with bronchial asthma wished a breather. Second, there had been walls. Castles did not have the front porches. That they had gatehouses, murder holes, and moats complete of things that bite. In case you didn't fall into the water, you still needed to fear about arrow slits and boiling oil. Yes, boiling oil. Your job description covered, may get flambéed for peeking. 1-3 There had been the servants and staff, the chefs, scribes, and stable boys. One incorrect appearance from you, and they might be whispering to the protect captain sooner than you could say, "I am just the herbalist." Assassins weren't just combating swords. They had been fighting gossip. And medieval gossip travels at light pace if it means someone receives to keep their head. And eventually your actual goal, paranoid. Rightfully so. These human beings were surrounded by means of backstabbers, relatives with claims to their titles, and 36 humans pretending to like them. They failed to consume without a tester. They failed to sleep without 3 locks on the door. Some even slept in decoy beds or turned around rooms like a lethal version of musical chairs. And do not get excited in case you pay attention. They may be attending a banquet. Yes, they may be under the influence of alcohol, but so will you, and you'll nonetheless should get past the royal guards, 3 dogs, a very alert jester, and 50 witnesses holding tankards. Even getting close to your target may want to take weeks. Posing as a servant, bribing a chambermaid, hiding in barrels. And when the moment in the end came, you had one shot. One particular, perfect, non-squeaky, non-bloody ghost vanish within the nighttime moment. Otherwise, you'd end up the subsequent public deterrent swinging from the castle gate with a sign that read, "Exceptional try." Let's be honest. When you photograph a medieval assassin, you in all likelihood believe smooth black robes, leather-based braces, perhaps a mysterious hood billowing inside the moonlight. In fact, you looked like a sick goat herder with something to hide. Disguises in the center, a long time weren't exactly high style. You didn't have custom-tailored cloaks or retractable armor. You had something you may scavenge. Peasant rags, a monk's gown sizes too massive, or the remains of a shield uniform that definitely still smelled like its preceding owner. The aim changed into the combo in, but mixing in meant looking like anyone else who hadn't bathed in 2 weeks, limped from antique accidents, and had a nervous twitch from malnutrition. You didn't look suspicious due to your cloak. You seemed suspicious because you kept adjusting your belt to hide a dagger wrapped in cheesecloth. And forget about masks. There were no Guy Fawkes options. Most face coverings just made you look like a leper, which changed into first rate for avoiding conversation, but horrible for entering parties. If anybody requested who you had been, you needed to assume Speedy. I am Brother Tobias. I take care of silent prayer and rooftop maintenance. Even assuming you made it past the guards, noble families weren't complete of idiots. Servants observed unusual faces, specifically ones that fumbled chamber pots and couldn't name the cook dinner's cat. You had been constantly one. I've never seen you earlier than away from being clubbed with a candlestick. And in case your disguise did paintings, congratulations. You now had to stay in character for hours, while pretending not to be aware, all of the very stab-worthy humans wandering by. Additionally, wigs, they did not exist. If you had to appearance older or younger, you have been stuck smearing dust in your face, squinting, and hopping. No person got close enough to notice that your beard was glued on with honey. The truth turned into, your cover didn't shield you. It gave you perhaps 5 minutes of confusion. After that, you needed to be long gone, invisible, or very, very convincing. And if anyone noticed via it properly, let's just say no one wants to be the assassin caught in the bishop's laundry room wearing a nun's habit and holding a sword, especially not on a dinner party day. In medieval instances, in case you have been an assassin, you did not have a group. You didn't have a sidekick with a crossbow, a smart alchemist in a mystery lair, or a handler who gave you coded scrolls and heat encouragement. You had a rusty dagger and crippling agree with issues. There were no guilds, at the least not ones you may truly count on. And if there were whispers of a brotherhood of assassins, it was in general tavern talk fueled by using mead and tedium. You were more likely to satisfy a ghost than another expert killer who wanted to network. Why the isolation? Because on your enterprise, the fewer folks that knew you existed, the longer you lived. Each contact was a hazard. Each unfastened tongue a capacity noose. Even your customer may not recognize your real name. And in the event that they did, you have been already planning your go out. Companionship. Laughable. Friends requested questions. Fans noticed bruises, blood stains, and why you always slept with a blade under the pillow. You could not settle down. You could not have the funds for two. One mistake, one person recognizing you in a market, and your whole existence became a dash for the closest sewer grate. Even fellow criminals kept their distance. Thieves and smugglers had been sociable. You have been that guy who makes people disappear. They feared you, or worse, saw you as a taking walks liability. No one wanted to proportion stew with a person whose career could appeal to a mob with torches. And do not count on sympathy. You couldn't tell everybody how difficult it became to sleep after silently strangling a corrupt bishop. In case you pointed out your job, human beings assumed you have been either lying or risky, and they weren't wrong. So you saved your secrets, your scars, and your weapons to yourself. At inns you sat in the darkest corner, again to the wall, eyes usually scanning the door. You in no way drank an excessive amount of. You by no means stayed extra than a night. You failed to say your name unless a person paid you first, and even then, it in all likelihood wasn't your actual one. Being a medieval murderer meant perfecting the art of vanishing, not just in a crowd, but from every life you by no means got to have. Let's consider you took the job. You planned your path. You bribed the right doorman. You disguised yourself as a very convincing chimney sweep. And then you iced up. Maybe the goal became round all at once. Perhaps they had been with their baby. Maybe you got the shakes at the worst viable moment, and your knife hand trembled like a terrified squirrel. Guess what? You're now useless. Because failure for a medieval murderer wasn't a slap on the wrist or a bad performance review. It became a public, painful, and wildly theatrical death, frequently regarding ropes, fireplace, wheels, or sharp iron gadgets with names like the Bone Cracker's Pride. Missing the kill meant blowing the whole operation. Your target lived, and at once told everybody that a person tried to murder them. Suddenly, you weren't a shadow. You had been a wanted man with a detailed description, and likely a crude caricature tacked to each tavern wall inside 30 miles. And people guards you once snuck past, now they may be motivated. Sometimes it wasn't even your target you needed to fear about. It was your purchaser. In case you failed, you had been now not an asset. You had been a liability. Someone who will be tortured, interrogated, or worse, talk. The very folks who paid you would be the first to put out a second contract on you. And there have been no second possibilities. No. Sorry. The blade slipped. I'll attempt once more the next day. You had one shot, one moment in time. And if you blew it, the excellent you can wish for turned into to die quickly earlier than absolutely everyone discovered out who hired you. Failure also supposed shame. The silent, humiliating kind. You did not just fail to kill. You did not be invisible. To be ideal. And for assassins, perfection changed into survival. Something much less may as properly paint a target in your return, and start practicing your very last phrase speech. It did not depend what number of jobs you'd carried out earlier. Nobody cared that you succeeded 12 instances. Due to the fact in this career, you're most effective as exact as your ultimate kill. And if your ultimate kill did not manifest, you'd better start going for walks. So you did it. The plan labored. The dagger struck genuine. No screams, no guards, only a clean drop to the ground and a totally important individual who now wasn't. Congratulations. Now run to your lifestyles. Due to the fact being a hit assassin in medieval times did not mean sipping wine on a rooftop, even as the metropolis burns at the back of you. It supposed fleeing via again alleys with a person's blood for your boots and a dog already sniffing your trail. There was no victory lap, no post-activity drink with colleagues, no casual debrief along with your patron. You failed to even get a second to respect your paintings. The moment your blade struck, your new job became escaping every person who now desires to murder you in increasingly creative methods. Guards coming, doors locked, horses tied up on the other aspect of Metropolis. You probable bleeding. You had to plot your exit earlier than the kill. Routes, disguises, fallback safe houses, maybe a boatman who owed you a favor or as a minimum failed to ask questions due to the fact the town could pass on lockdown inside minutes. No person desired a scandal. And lockdown meant closed gates, armed checkpoints, and a dozen irritated men with swords who all just received your tough caricature, and the phrase, perhaps armed and extremely stabby. And permits speak about the consumer. Assuming they certainly planned to pay you, they weren't going to satisfy you at an at-ease tavern with a smile and a thanks card. They'd probably vanish too. Because a murderer who just finished a process is the most dangerous person alive. You knew an excessive amount of. You'd proven you may get into places others couldn't. So even whilst you succeeded, you walked away with coin in one hand and a massive goal for your back. And what did you win? A week of drowsing in haylofts, bribing ferry captains, shaving your beard in the darkish, and pretending your name was Brother Lucian as you tried to combo in with clergymen heading east. Due to the fact success didn't mean survival. It intended starting the whole game over in a brand new town below a new call, with even more human beings searching out you this time. So yes, you made the kill. Now run like hell. If being a medieval assassin wasn't already miserable sufficient, poor, hunted, and drowsing in places that smelled like goat, you furthermore may needed to cope with the wonderfully innovative paranoia of the people round you. Due to the fact in the Center Ages, assassins were not just feared, they had been taken into consideration cursed. To the average peasant, you weren't just a killer in a hood. You have been a few unholy creature who whispered to demons and smeared frog guts for your blade below a full moon. Why else might you be able to sneak beyond guards and vanish in the darkish? Common sense wasn't precisely famous lower back then, but superstition. Oh, that changed into everywhere. Some believed assassins could shapeshift. Others claimed you have been invisible until bathed in holy water. One famous story counseled assassins made pacts with woodland spirits and could breathe dying through partitions. Imagine strolling through a village and listening to a female mutter, Do not make eye contact. He would possibly hex the infant. Even your gear were suspect. Wearing a dagger. Truly, it changed into cast in a cursed forge. The usage of poison. That wasn't chemistry. That turned into witchcraft. And you possibly stirred it with a severed toe under a blood moon. You would assume this fear may assist you. In the end, people avoided you, right? But the truth was worse. Superstitious mobs don't hesitate. They don't ask questions. They throw stones, set fires, and shout things like, "Burn him earlier than he calls lightning." Your popularity made people overreact. The second someone died unexpectedly, contamination, accident, choking on a hen bone, someone could whisper, maybe it turned into a shadow man. Perhaps it became him. You could be hunted only for current inside the same village, as a suspicious loss of life. That meant you had to preserve moving always. Live too long, and suddenly, a clergyman is ringing a bell, whilst 5 angry farmers preserve pitchforks like they have been waiting for this moment their entire lives. And heaven assist you in case you had been stuck with whatever remotely weird, dried herbs, strange coins, or maybe a overseas accessory. That's all it took for a person to shout, "Sorcerer," and light a torch. In a global that believed monsters wore human faces, being too quiet, too smart, or too fast made you a danger. And in medieval logic, threats needed to die quick and preferably on hearth. Poison. The murderer's weapon of beauty. A quiet kill, no mess, no screaming, no metallic on bone, just a sip, a stagger, a sigh, and accomplished. It is the concept. In practice, poisoning someone within the center, a long time was like seeking to win a bar combat with natural tea and an awful mindset. First of all, poisons were not dependable. You didn't have get entry to purified cyanide or a neat little pill labeled rapid-acting doom. You had flowers, mushrooms, minerals, maybe the occasional toad. You needed to accumulate, grind, and pray, and even then, it would just give the target a belly ache and a renewed commitment to his anti-assassin protect group. There was no scientific measurement. You did not dose precisely. You eyeballed it. A pinch too little, and the noble just vomits and cancels dinner. A pinch an excessive amount of, and also you die from publicity before the primary course is served. Also, medieval kitchens were chaotic. You couldn't just waltz in and season the soup with nightshade. You needed to bribe or impersonate a cooked dinner, sneak in at the same time as no one was looking, or worst of all, try and poison a meal that would go through 3 tasters and a canine. Yes, a canine. And in case your sufferer turned into a noble, they didn't just eat food. They dealt with it like an army operation. Food were tasted, blessed, and sniffed by each person from the steward to the jester. By the point the food hit their plate, it had passed via greater security than a royal wedding. Even assuming you probably did it, you slipped inside the poison. It wasn't detected, and the target really ate it. The subsequent factor was wildly unpredictable. Some poisons took hours, some took days. 1 minute, your mark is laughing at a joke. The subsequent, he is clutching his stomach and demanding to see his astrologer. And in the event that they survived, wager who that they had blame. No longer the cook dinner. Now not the taster. You, the quiet guy with the natural expertise and twitchy eyes. So poisoning wasn't green. It was risky, sluggish, and full of variables, none of them in your want. And if you had been caught, you failed to get a brief dying. You bought interrogated with equipment until you confessed to poisoning each person from the Duke to the dog. You would suppose that in case you successfully changed the path of records through putting off a tyrant, sabotaging a royal bloodline, or silencing a political risk, someone would consider your name. Nope. You have been an assassin. That's supposed your name turned into, in no way meant to be remembered. At first class you were a rumor, a few hooded parent, a foreigner with bloodless eyes, or the quiet guy who by no means finished his ale. You might have pulled off the maximum legendary hit of the century, and nevertheless ended up as a mysterious dying in the reputable record. In reality, that became the factor. Your consumer did not need a story. They wanted conceivable deniability. The less folks that knew who did it, the more secure they have been, and the less probably they had been to end up poisoned through their very own murderer. So your name become buried the moment the job turned into performed. If you even used the actual one, you failed to sign your work. You did not brag. You failed to preserve trophies. You did not exist outside the moment of the kill. And if someone did know your name, that became a loose end. And to your career, loose ends had a completely short shelf life. And neglect approximately honor. There were no medals for silence. No stone monuments for the man who stopped a war with one dagger within the night time. If a noble desired a statue, they commissioned one for themselves. You got a wooden container, an unmarked grave, or if things went definitely badly, a head on a spike classified traitor. Once in a while your call turned into recognized only so it may be cursed. You'd emerge as a whispered caution. Do not cross the king. Recall what happened to Lord Ulrich. Yes. And the person who did it. Long past like a ghost. That turned into your legacy. No longer reputation, not worry, just absence. You weren't supposed to depart a mark. You had been speculated to vanish. And in case you caught round long enough to be recognized, that was a fatal mistake due to the fact within the medieval international, heroes were given remembered. Assassins got erased. So you survived. To procure the task finished. You even managed to get a commission. A miracle in itself. Now all you have to do is lay low, maintain your head down, and believe that your client will honor the deal and guard your identity. Right. Wrong. Due to the fact inside the International of Medieval Assassination, there has been one rule even more sacred than don't get caught. In no way agree with each person, specifically the man or woman paying you. Your purchaser, be they a noble, a service provider, or a bishop with ambition and very free morals, didn't lease you out of admire. They hired you because they needed something awful achieved, and you have been the sharpest tool in the shadows. As soon as the job was entire, you became a liability. You knew an excessive amount of. You knew who desired who useless, when, why, and probable how a great deal they have been inclined to pay for it. That made you risky, no longer just to their enemies, however to them. So what did they do? They ghosted you. They denied they ever met you. Or worse, they sent a person else wants you to clean up, to tie off the settlement with something sharper than ink. There were even cases where customers double-booked, hearing one murderer to do the task and another to kill the primary one right now after. No refunds, just decreased risk. And if you dared try and blackmail a consumer, threaten to show them, that was ambitious, and also your very last mistake. due to the fact effective humans inside the middle a long time did not negotiate with assassins. They beaten them. If your customer had a shred of honor, an extraordinary species indeed, you might get paid and left on my own. However, even then, you'd nonetheless have to assume they had been looking you from a distance with a person already sprucing metallic and memorizing your stroll. You were the secret that couldn't communicate, the shadow that couldn't live. Even success wasn't sufficient to earn agree with, due to the fact of their eyes. If you killed as soon as, you can kill once more. And no person, no longer even the person who hired you, wanted to be subsequent. Shall we say in some way you beat the chances? You survived the kills, the lies, the poisonings, the betrayals. You outlived your enemies, your employers, and probably your personal experience of morality. Now what? You retire. In reality, no longer. Because in medieval times, assassins did not get retirement plans. There were no farewell banquets, no quiet cottages with the aid of the sea, no pensions paid in gold cash and thankful whispers. You did not fade right into a peaceful lifestyles. You vanished, otherwise you died, often both. The trouble was simple. You were in no way safe. Even if you walked away from the activity, your past failed too. You had too many secrets in your head, too many names to your reminiscence, and too much blood in your hands. Folks did not want you retired. They desired you forgotten, which typically intended buried. Or even if no one came after you, and that's a big if, you had to stay with a regular fear that a person would possibly. That a brand new murderer, younger and keen to show himself, had just received an agreement for a shadowy figure who was once a person dangerous. So you changed your name once more. You moved to a village wherein nobody asked questions. You faked a limp, offered herbs, pretended you as soon as labored as a shield. But even then, you did not sleep well. You averted crowds. You always sat going through the door. You kept your dagger underneath the floorboard, next to the pouch of cash you by no means touched, as it still smelled like the man you earned it from. And also, you couldn't trust yourself either. Years of silent killings and brief escapes did something on your brain. Every knock at the door made you balk. Each stranger on the street would possibly recognize you. You stopped dreaming because dreaming changed into risky. You couldn't love. You couldn't loosen up. You could not chuckle too loud. You lived like a ghost, pretending to be a person. The truth was, there has been no endgame for a medieval assassin. Just a slow, cold fade into obscurity, constantly transferring, usually looking, until sooner or later you slipped into the darkish and nobody noticed. And maybe that was the pleasant you can hope for. Through now, you've probably figured it out. Being a medieval assassin wasn't darkly romantic. It wasn't noble. It wasn't even all that profitable. It changed into a grim, thankless, quick-lived profession wrapped in blood-stained linen, and observed with the aid of a crowd of those who wanted you useless. You would not last not a week, maybe no longer even a day, because you'd start with the incorrect assumptions, which you'd be easy on top of things, a whisper inside the dark. But what you'd truly be is cold, hungry, and one horrific guess far away from the noose. You'll slip into Metropolis, cloak pulled tight, ready for motion, most effective to find out that your goal moved locations. The guards are under the influence of alcohol but cause happy. And the stable boy you paid for statistics just sold you out for a mug of ale and a bit of bread. You'll freeze at the incorrect time. Stab the wrong man. Get noticed by a person's maid, who as soon as noticed your face close to the chapel. And abruptly, you are now not a shadow. You are the trouble. Then what? You run, but you're now not used to medieval terrain. The mud, the uneven cobblestones, the genuinely insane range of loose chickens in the street. You slip, fall, get tackled by way of a defend named Thomas who just got dumped and is searching out an outlet. And shall we say you continue to be that? Then you definitely address the aftermath. No allies, no honor, and no destiny. Just whispers, suspicion, and the growing realization that even in case you succeed, the first rate you can hope for is to die old and by myself, hiding behind a false name in a village that also believes in fairies. So no, you wouldn't last, and admittedly, you should not try, due to the fact the murderer's existence wasn't cool. It changed into a merciless machine that chewed humans up and spat out not anything however shadows. It supplied energy without peace and motive, without an area inside the global. You failed to make history. You erased yourself from it. And the simplest thing waiting for you at the stop was silence. A silence no one could query, because no one even remembered you were there within the first region. Before she became the feared queen of Macedonia, Olympias became called Meatael, a Molossian princess from the rugged tribal lands of Epirus. Her humans claimed descent from Achilles himself. And whether or not the blood of heroes in reality ran in her veins, one factor became positive. This turned into not a girl born for the sidelines of records. From a younger age, Meatael became steeped in mystery and ritual. Her upbringing turned into formed now not just via politics, but via prophecy, ecstatic rites, and a reverence for the ancient gods. She wasn't the kind of princess who smiled and embroidered tapestries. No, she became drawn to serpents, omens, and the frenzied ceremonies of the cult of Dionysus, where girls danced barefoot within the moonlight and called upon the divine in states of trance. Her connection to the gods wasn't performative. It was non-public. She did not merely worship, she embodied. In step with ancient sources, in all likelihood written by men each terrified and enthralled, she saved sacred snakes in her chambers and even allowed them to coil beside her in mattress. Whether this became a literal reality or the type of slander that powerful women entice like flies, we're going to never recognize, but it stuck. To her allies, it made her divine. To her enemies, it made her dangerous. Her real power started out no longer in a battlefield or throne room. However, within the uneasy flicker of torchlight, most of the whispers of priestesses, and the curling our bodies of serpents. She wasn't just a princess. She became a reciting oracle, a female touched with the aid of something older than politics and colder than steel. So whilst Philip II of Macedon, brutal, amazing, and famously horny, arrived at the island of Samothrace for a religious initiation, he did not just meet a stunning princess. He met a mystery he couldn't face up to. Their marriage wasn't just a political alliance. It was a collision of prophecy and energy. And from the very starting, it became full of omens. Some said lightning struck the sky on their wedding ceremony night time. Others claimed Olympias dreamed of a thunderbolt entering her womb. All of it would become legend. But one element is sure. The union of Olympias and Philip failed to just create a baby. It created Alexander the extremely good. And she or he supposed to shape his future from the very first breath. Olympias' marriage to Philip II turned into no longer the fairy tale, one might anticipate for a queen who would sooner or later start an empire. From the start, it became a flammable blend of prophecy, satisfaction, and paranoia. Philip, ruthless, charismatic, and already collecting other halves like trophies, married Olympia's round 357 B.C. Lee. She was probably just a teen, however she wasn't naive. She saw in Philip a person whose ambition matched her personal, and possibly even a divine suit for her religious future. Macedon wasn't exactly an easy kingdom to walk into. It became a land of iron and ambition, where kings had been killed, by means of cousins and brothers become competitors overnight. But Olympias, the priestess of Epirus, walked in along with her head held excessive and eyes already at the crown. Their marriage changed into rocky from the start. Philip, for all his political genius, changed into not built for monogamy. He could cross directly to marry a couple of girls, regularly for alliances, always for power. But Olympias wasn't one to sit down quietly in the shadows. She held her very own court docket, maintained her very own alliances, and was known to turn to oracles and rites to divine her destiny, and perhaps Philip's destiny. Then came the birth of Alexander. Even that was wrapped in celestial drama. Legends say Olympias dreamed that a thunderbolt struck her womb, and that flames danced round her toddler without burning him. Philip reportedly had an imaginative and prescient of sealing his wife's womb with a lion. Yes, a literal lion. Whether or not they believed these visions or invented them, they surely acted as though Alexander was destined to rule now not only a nation but the world. But at the same time as the child turned into celebrated, cracks inside the royal marriage deepened. Olympias resented Philip's other better halves, mainly his Macedonian bride, Cleopatra Eurydice, whom he married later in lifestyles. This was more than a domestic issue. It became a hazard. Cleopatra was Macedonian-born, and any son she bore might be purer in the eyes of the aristocracy, an instantaneous chance to Alexander's destiny. Olympia saw it truly. The palace wasn't just a domestic. It became a battlefield, and she or he could use each snake, dream, ritual, and whisper. She had to ensure her son wasn't just remembered, but topped. She was now not Meatail. She was Olympia's now, and nobody might take her son's throne without going through her wrath. By the time Alexander was a teenager, the Macedonian palace in Pella had come to be a battle zone of veiled insults, political maneuvering, and bitter rivalries. Olympia's wasn't simply preventing for affect. She became combating for survival. She knew that the courtroom turned into full of snakes, but she turned into the only who taught them how to chunk. Philip II had all started to distance himself from her. He was campaigning greater, ingesting extra, and possibly worst of all, listening greater to his Macedonian advisors. The final blow got here, whilst he married a younger noble girl named Cleopatra Eurydice, not to be confused with the Cleopatra of Egypt. This Cleopatra changed into Macedonian-born, and her uncle Attalus changed into one in all Philip's pinnacle generals. To Olympias, it wasn't just betrayal. It turned into a declaration of war. The marriage ceremony was a catastrophe. At the banquet, Attalus drunkenly mocked Olympias and Alexander, calling into question the legitimacy of Alexander's delivery. Changed into he in reality Philip's son, or was he the child of a god, as Olympias liked to claim? It turned into intended as an insult, but Olympias seized the myth. Let them whisper. allow them to believe her son become touched by Zeus. It made him untouchable. Alexander stormed out of the ceremonial dinner. Olympias left Macedon completely, withdrawing to Epirus. But her exile became not defeat. It was strategy. In her place of birth, she changed into nevertheless royalty. She could collect aid, whisper in ears, and watch as Philip's palace began to rot from inside. She did not need to be physically present to be dangerous. Then came the surprise wave. Philip changed into assassinated at his daughter's wedding just as he was about to invade Persia, just as he changed into on the verge of crowning himself, now not simply king of Macedon, however potential emperor of the known world. The query that echoed through every marble corridor and torchlit hallway was the same. Who did it? Was it Pausanias, the jilted bodyguard who carried out the act? Become it the result of court docket intrigue? Was it Alexander himself? Or whisper it softly, was it Olympias? No one may want to prove it. Nobody dared, but many believed it. After all, inside days, Cleopatra Eurydice and her newborn child have been useless. Murdered, some say, by using Olympias herself. The serpent had lured her back to the palace, and now nothing stood among her son and the throne. With Philip dead and Macedon in mourning or confusion, Olympias made her circulate. Whilst others scrambled to recognize the chaos, she acted hastily, brutally, decisively. First, Cleopatra Eurydice, the young Macedonian queen and rival spouse, was eliminated. According to chilling money ode, Olympias failed to just have her killed. She made her death symbolic, public, humiliating. Some say Cleopatra turned into pressured to hang herself after watching her toddler daughter be murdered. Others declare Olympias had the child thrown onto a funeral pyre. What is agreed upon is this: no mercy turned into proven. Olympias understood what many moms in historical courts refused to accept. In a royal palace, mercy is a liability. A rival baby, regardless of how small, is a future conflict. And Olympias was done playing defense. With Cleopatra and her bloodline erased, she could turn her attention to securing Alexander's throne. Her teenage son, formidable, awesome, already educated by way of Aristotle, changed into declared king without serious competition. But do not be fooled. It wasn't just his air of mystery or his father's legacy that made it viable. It became Olympia's. She knew which generals to threaten, which nobles to flatter, and which enemies to quietly take away. She wasn't simply protective of her son's upward push, she became engineering it. Alexander himself failed to constantly approve. He reportedly disapproved of the violence against Cleopatra's own family, but he additionally didn't prevent it, due to the fact deep down he knew what Olympias had usually acknowledged: power needs blood. And in Macedon, bloodlines had been each a blessing and a curse. Along with her son now king, Olympias began to recede slightly from public lifestyles, but this turned into no retirement. She absolutely shifted from open strikes to whispered have an effect on. As Alexander organized to launch his conquest of Persia, she remained in the back of, now not as a passive queen mother, but as the religious parent of his destiny. She sent him sacred relics, consulted oracles, and carried out rituals on his behalf. To Olympias, her son's undertaking wasn't just military. It became divine. Alexander wasn't going to battle. He turned into satisfying prophecy. And so long as she drew breath, no rival, Macedonian, Persian, or otherwise, would derail that divine plan. She had topped her son. She had cleansed the palace. Now she would shield his empire from behind the curtain with enamel bared. As Alexander marched east to overcome the acknowledged world, Olympias remained behind in Macedon, a queen without a throne, however not without strength. Her reputable name turned into Queen Mother, but make no mistake, she ruled in all but name. Though regency was technically passed to Antipater, certainly one of Alexander's depended on generals, Olympias refused to be sidelined. She wrote letters to her son continuously, advising, cautioning, now and again chastising him. These weren't the candy letters of a doting mom. They were political briefings, laced with oracles and venom. And Alexander, hundreds of miles away, studied each phrase. She reminded him who his proper enemies were. She questioned the loyalty of his companions. She criticized his fascination with Persian customs, his choice of better halves, and his flirtation with calling himself a god. Nobody else dared say these items to him, but Olympias was in no way afraid to speak as a mom or a priestess of divine will. Returned in Macedon, Antipater grew increasingly more resentful. Olympias undermined him at every flip. She used her status, her spiritual authority, and her family ties to stir opposition in opposition to him. She had an effect in Epirus, in Thessaly, and among nobility. She may want to unfold rumors like wildfire, and with Olympias, a whisper may be deadlier than a sword. In the meantime, her letters to Alexander became extra pressing. She warned him of Antipater's ambition, portray him as a second Philip, geared up to betray and usurp. Whether or not she, without a doubt, believed it or absolutely feared dropping her grip, she kept urging her son to behave. Alexander but hesitated. He wished Antipater to preserve order in Greece whilst he fought in Asia. And so the rift between mother and accepted widened. Olympias watched. She waited, but under her non-secular gowns and maternal challenge, she became growing impatient. She hadn't persisted years of palace struggle to be dominated over with the aid of an vintage soldier. As Alexander's empire stretched from the Aegean to India, Olympias noticed cracks forming. He turned into taking over an excessive amount of, trusting too many overseas advisors, and drifting away from the mom and the gods that made him. She believed his victories got here from divine desire and from her. And if he forgot that properly, Olympias knew a way to remind kings who they definitely were, even though that king changed into her own son. Whilst news of Alexander's demise in Babylon reached Macedon in 323 B.C., it failed to arrive like a trumpet. It arrived like a dagger. For Olympias, it wasn't just the loss of a son. It became the fall apart of a world she had spent a long time constructing. Her boy, the divine typhoon she had prophesied, raised, unleashed, was gone. And he'd left in the back of no clean air, no single successor, best chaos. The potent empire he carved out turned into already fracturing. Generals, his so known as successors, were already dividing it up like jackals around a corpse. Antipater nonetheless held power in Macedon and Greece, and he had no love for Olympias. Worse, her daughter Cleopatra, Alexander's sister, was being courted through rival generals for marriage, everyone hopping to use her bloodline as a declare to the throne. Olympias noticed what changed into coming. Civil conflict wasn't a possibility. It changed into inevitable. And once more she might ought to act. But she no longer had Alexander. What she had as a substitute became his bloodline, His younger son, Alexander IV, born to Roxana, the Bactrian princess Alexander had married. Roxana, nevertheless in Macedon, was susceptible. The boy turned into even more so. Olympias recognized that the little one was now the ultimate true piece of her son's legacy, and that made him a target, but it additionally made him a weapon. She allied herself with Roxana and the boy, decided to defend them, and use the child's birthright to stake her personal claim inside the political battlefield. But the tide turned into turning. The generals who once bowed to Alexander had no interest in kneeling to his widow or his mother. That they had armies now, objectives and grudges. Olympias failed to draw back. She'd faced snakes, traitors, and kings. A few warlords with crowns and stolen spears would not scare her. So she plotted. She waited. She watched as Antipater died and changed into replaced via his son, Cassander, a person with ice in his veins and no tolerance for the old queen's games. It became best a relay of time before these two forces collided. The serpent mom of Alexander and the cold-eyed usurper who wanted her buried. Alexander was gone, but his shadow became nevertheless moving. And Olympias was nonetheless coiled within it, ready to strike. Years after Alexander's loss of life, at the same time as his empire crumbled into civil struggle, Olympias made her maximum audacious circulate yet. She backed to Macedon, not as a grieving mother, however as a political pressure of divine fury. The regency were splintered. Cassander, the son of her vintage enemy Antipater, turned into seizing energy, and Roxana, in conjunction with younger Alexander IV, was effectively imprisoned. Olympias saw the writing at the wall. If she did not act now, her grandson could vanish like a shadow at nightfall. So she made a deal with Polyperchon, and growing aging trendy, who nevertheless held a flicker of valid authority. Olympias might return, now not to plead but to rule. With Polyperchon's backing, she entered Macedon at the pinnacle of a navy. And the moment her feet touched domestic soil, the whole lot changed. Cities opened their gates. Soldiers defected to her facet. Even some of her antique enemies hesitated. Olympias, notwithstanding her age, was still a call that shook the floor. Then came her vengeance. Separately, she hunted down the loyalists of Cassander. And whilst she sooner or later caught Philip III, Orhidius, Alexander's mentally impaired half-brother and puppet king, she ordered his execution. In step with some sources, his spouse Eurydice became captured and given the possibility to kill herself. Whilst she refused, Olympias had her strangled. It was brutality veiled in royal protocol, and Olympias, ever theatrical, staged the scene like a goddess turning injustice. Her message turned into clear. Only the bloodline of Alexander had the right to rule. Everybody else turned into a pretender. For a short, burning moment, Olympias held the dominion in her grip. She had restored the dynasty. She had avenged betrayals. She had reminded Macedon what royal electricity looked like whilst wielded by using a girl, with nothing left to lose. But power in Macedon became like fireplace in dry grass. And Cassander became still available, calculating, biding his time. He returned with a vengeance. His navy outnumbered hers, his resources deeper, his cruelty less warm. Her allies started out to abandon her. Polyperchon lost have an effect on. The tide grew to become. Olympias, now remoted in the castle of Pydna, watched as her enemies closed in. She had lit the suit. Macedon had burned, and now the smoke became thick, and her enemies have been at the gates. Olympias, once the maximum feared woman in the ancient world, now located herself besieged inside the coastal citadel of Pydna, by a lone, cut off, surrounded with the aid of the military of Cassander, who had come to complete what his father had began. But Olympias didn't beg. She failed to plead. For almost 12 months, she persisted the siege like a statue carved from divine wrath. Meals ran short. Disorder crept in. Allies vanished. But within the fortress walls, she maintained the identical unshakable presence that had as soon as shaken kings. To the very cease, she carried herself now not as a prisoner, however, because the mom of a god. Cassander, ever cautious, hesitated. He knew killing Olympias turned into risky. Even now, she carried a delusion around her like armor. She was nonetheless the mother of Alexander the Amazing. To strike her down may appear like blasphemy. So he offered her safety. Surrender, he said, and her existence could be spared. Olympias knew better. She had seen too many royal guarantees turn to ash. Still, starvation turned into not only a discomfort. It turned into dying. Her garrison broke. Her fans surrendered. And Olympias, unbending till the very give up, was finally passed over to her enemies. Cassander did not kill her himself. That might have been too easy and too merciful. Instead, he became her over to the households of those she had achieved at some point of her short return to power. Let them decide her fate. They condemned her to dying. However, here's the capture. Whilst the executioners came, no one dared strike the first blow. Olympia stood tall, regal, silent, eyes constant on them like an oracle staring through smoke. Those had been Macedonians. That they had grown up listening to of her rituals, her visions, her snakes. That they had once cheered her son as a reciting god. And now here she stood, a frail old woman cloaked in myth. And no longer a single man had the courage to swing the sword. So Cassander sent others, foreigners, outsiders, folks who had no memory of her power, handiest orders to observe. And consequently, Olympias became in the end struck down, not with right, no longer with dignity, however with silence. Her loss of life marked the stop of Alexander's bloodline in any significant strength. And with it, the very last ember of an empire based on divine ambition was snuffed out. But even in demise, Olympias left behind a shadow. And history would never neglect the Serpent Queen. Olympias died not on a throne, but inside the dust, unarmed, deserted, and achieved with the aid of the very people she as soon as ruled. But history is strange. It does no longer continually desire the ones who die in silk sheets. From time to time, it recalls people who went down hissing. And Olympias turned into by no means supposed for quiet history. In lifestyles, she had wielded motherhood like a sword and prophecy like a protect. She wasn't simply the mom of Alexander, the extremely good. She became one of the architects of his rise. Without her, there is no fantasy of the divine toddler. No rituals whispering of thunderbolts and lions. No ruthless purging of rivals that cleared the path for a teenage king to rule the acknowledged global. Olympias did not simply give start to an empire. She defended it with claws. Yet even a few of the historic global's most ruthless dynasts, Olympias stands apart. She failed to command armies within the field like Cleopatra, or journey into battle like Boudica. Her battlefield was subtler and colder. It became a world of poison goblets, political marriages, priestesses, and oracles. She understood the electricity of worry, or even extra importantly, she understood the power of notion. She made humans agree with her son changed into divine, and she can also have believed it herself. Her enemies branded her a murderer, a witch, a manipulator, and that they weren't incorrect. Olympias became all those things and greater. She was the maid from a brutal global that reputable cunning far more than kindness, and he found out early that mercy was a luxurious queens couldn't find the money for. In the centuries that accompanied, she was both vilified and mythologized. Some called her a villain, others a visionary. But no historian, ancient or modern day, could call her inappropriate. She haunted the legacy of Alexander like a phantom, continually in the background, always just behind the scenes. And maybe that really is exactly where she belonged, not as a tragic mom or a footnote in a king's tale, but as a story unto herself. The lady who wrapped herself in prophecy, slept beside snakes, and outlived gods. Olympia's bones turned to dust lengthy in the past, but her legend endures in each story of ruthless queens, in each whisper of blood-borne destiny, in every empire built on fantasy. She is still there, coiled in the dark, waiting. At the sun-bleached island of Crete, only some miles south of the contemporary town of Heraklion, lies a ruin that feels greater like a dream than a real location. Stone corridors snake in all directions. Rooms twist and double back. Staircases lead nowhere. It is clean to lose your experience of path, even nowadays. This place is Knossos, the coronary heart of Minoan civilization, and the meant thought for one of the most enduring myths in human records, the labyrinth of the Minotaur. But before there was a legend, there was a palace. A palace in contrast to any other. Built round 1900 B.C. and expanded over centuries, Knossos wasn't only a royal house. It turned into an entire metropolis beneath one roof. Protecting almost 150,000 square toes, it featured over 1,000 rooms, light wells, garage magazines, shrines, workshops, and what may additionally were the primary flushing bathrooms in history. It had running water, multi-story apartments, and a difficult device of airflow. This wasn't a primitive castle. It was an architectural masterpiece. To fashionable archaeologists, Knossos seems like prepared chaos. To historic visitors, it in all likelihood felt like magic. The person who brought Knossos into modern-day cognizance became British archaeologist Arthur Evans. Within the early 1900s, Evans excavated the website online and fast have become convinced that this changed into the foundation of the Greek labyrinth myth. The layout became disorienting, the architecture deeply symbolic, and everywhere he observed motifs of bulls painted on partitions, carved into stone, or sculpted into tiny golden charms. The bull, in any case, was sacred to the Minoans. Evans even went to this point as to call the civilization after the mythic king Minos. Whether or not Minos was real or no longer, his legend became inseparable from the ruins. But here's the twist. No one's determined a literal labyrinth. No underground maze, no prison chambers, no half-man monster. What we've got as a substitute is something a long way more mysterious. A metropolis designed in loops, wings, and layers, intentionally hard to navigate. And the deeper you cross, the more the lines between records and mythology blur. So the question remains, turned into the Minotaur born from these partitions, or was the palace itself the monster? Gnosis might not surrender its answers easily, but it's very good at making us ask the right questions. The parable is as famous because the wreck, a tremendous half-man, half of bull trapped in a labyrinth so complicated that nobody who entered ever discovered their way out. Solely Theseus, the Athenian hero, managed to kill the beast and get away thanks to a ball of thread and the foxy of Princess Ariadne. But wherein did this story come from? And why a labyrinth? The earliest variations of the parable speak of King Minos, the powerful ruler of Crete, who demanded tribute from Athens within the form of 7 boys and 7 ladies each year. These unfortunate souls were fed to the Minotaur, a creature born from divine punishment and disgrace. The Minotaur, locked in an underground maze, symbolized the darkish underbelly of strength, something savage hidden in the back of grandeur. To ancient Greeks, Crete had long been a land of wealth, thriller, and worry. Its seafaring human beings, the Minoans, were seen as each elegant and alien. Their rituals worried bull leaping, their artwork depicted unusual gods, and their palaces were in contrast to whatever at the mainland. To a touring Greek from 1000 B.C., Gnosis would possibly have felt like any other world. The bull itself changed into sacred in Minoan lifestyle. Fresco display young males and females vaulting over charging bulls in ritual displays. Horns of consecration, stylized bull horns, appear on rooftops and altars. Combine this with a palace that appears like a maze, and the elements for a legend begin to stir. But what if the Minotaur wasn't only a monster? What if it became a metaphor? Some students agree with the tale displays a memory of Cretan dominance over the Aegean, a time when Athens actually did pay tribute to a more potent, stranger strength. The labyrinth could signify the political entrapment of weaker states, and the Minotaur, the uncooked, terrifying force behind Minoan rule. Others argue it's more mental. The labyrinth because the subconscious mind, the Minotaur as our hidden urges, and Theseus the hero strolling bravely into the darkness, guided simplest by the thread of memory. Still, the parable remains tangled with Gnosis. The palace is the nearest factor we've ever observed to a real labyrinth. No monster, no Ariadne, but perhaps something deeper. Not only a delusion echoing through records, but a history that changed into asking to become fable. Long before Athens raised its marble temples or Sparta sharpened its spears, there was the Minoan civilization, one of the earliest superior societies in Europe. They ruled no longer through conquest, but via change, art, and what looks like a nearly supernatural command of architecture. At the heart of their strength stood Gnosis, a palace that wasn't just a seat of royalty. It changed into a hub of subculture, ritual, and economy. The Minoans flourished from around 2600 to 1400 B.C. Based on Crete, they advanced a sprawling change network that reached Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Levant, and even the distant beaches of Spain. Their ships reduced through the Mediterranean like silent arrows ferrying pottery, saffron, bronze, and luxury items. They didn't construct full-size armies. They constructed relationships, and that more than weapons made them wealthy. What is maximum striking approximately Minoan way of life is how one-of-a-kind it was from their later Greek successors. Their artwork celebrated nature, animals, and flowing human motion, not struggle or divine punishment. Frescoes show dancers, dolphins, and athletes vaulting over bulls. Even their goddesses are one of a kind, powerful naked-breasted figures often retaining snakes, symbols of fertility, transformation, or safety. On the middle of all of it changed into Knossos, no longer a fort on a hill, but a complicated in a fertile valley. It had no big shielding walls, suggesting the Minoans both felt cozy on their island or projected enough power to make protection useless. Their self-assurance became architectural. Multi-tale homes, colonnaded courtyards, and advanced plumbing structures hinted at a society a ways beforehand of its time. And yet, for all their sophistication, the Minoans left at the back of no deciphered written records. Their number one script, Linear A, remains unreadable to these days. We don't know what they called themselves. We do not know what their kings believed, what prayers they spoke, or what sincerely came about in the back of the partitions of Knossos. All we've are their ruins, their artwork, and their influence, absorbed later by the Mycenaeans and echoed in Greek myths. The Minoans were no longer just builders of palaces. They were architects of thriller. And Knossos wasn't merely a building. It became the thrashing coronary heart of a civilization that shimmered for a moment like sunlight on the Aegean, after which vanished. But some say their echo still wanders the maze. To walk through Knossos is to walk through time, layered, puzzling, lovely time. It is now not just the dimensions that overwhelms you. It is the design. Rooms cause rooms. Corridors break up and vanish. Light wells cut through the coronary heart of the building. Stairs spiral into shadows or emerge unexpectedly into sunlit courtyards. Nothing actions in an immediately line. It's not hard to see why ancient site visitors would possibly have whispered, labyrinth. Knossos wasn't just a palace. It became a dwelling organism. Spanning an expected 150,000 rectangular feet, the complex contained over 1,000 chambers, a few tiny, some grand. These weren't randomly placed rooms. They have been cause-built workshops, storage spaces, shrines, apartments, and throne rooms, all arranged round a large critical courtyard that may have hosted public ceremonies or bull-leaping rituals. The palace turned into constructed on multiple degrees, as much as 4 or 5 stories tall in places, the usage of herbal slopes and artificial terraces. To navigate it without getting lost, you'd want reminiscence, instinct, or a thread like Theseus. And yet this apparent chaos hides a top-notch intelligence. The Minoans mastered passive ventilation, cooling rooms via air shafts and open stairwells. They funneled rainwater via clay pipes and had bathrooms that flushed long before Rome made it fashionable. One of the maximum iconic areas is the so referred to as throne room, named for the alabaster chair built into the wall flanked through benches. Round it are fresco of griffins, mythical guardians. Become this the seat of a priest-king, a goddess's chamber, a sacred court. No person is aware of for certain. And the walls, they speak in shade. Vibrant fresco display dolphins swimming above bathtubs, girls in elegant flounced skirts with bare chests, youths leaping bulls mid-air. The art wasn't simply ornament. It became identification, fluid, natural, deeply linked to earth and sea. Still, the deeper you cross, the extra Knossos starts off-evolved to disorient. A few parts seem intentionally complicated, like they were designed to confuse. Perhaps it truly is the basis of the labyrinth legend. Now not a prison for monsters, but a palace that felt alive, a building that invited awe, ritual, and just a contact of worry. No locked doors, no legendary beasts. Simply an area constructed to make you question where you were and what was waiting round the subsequent nook. Knossos wasn't just in workplace or royal house. It changed into a place of worship, an architectural expression of the Minoan soul, steeped in ritual, delusion, and divine mystery. Unlike later Greek temples, there are not any towering columns to Zeus or marble shrines to Athena. Alternatively, the religious world of Knossos is more diffused, woven into the fabric of the building itself. Shrines conceal in corners. Pillars upward rise like sacred sentinels. Horns stylized, carved, symbolic, appear on rooftops and altars. Anywhere you appearance, the bull motif dominates, suggesting an effective connection among worship, the herbal world, and this respected animal. The Minoans didn't appear to worry the bull. They celebrated it. The famous bull-leaping fresco in Knossos isn't just athletic art. It is able to depict a non-secular rite, younger males and females vaulting over a charging bull, locked in a dance of chance and grace. It wasn't sport. It became sacred theater, probable an offering to the gods or a symbolic overcome chaos. Then there are the snake goddesses discovered in storerooms beneath the palace. The snake goddess figurines are a number of the most iconic Minoan artifacts. Naked-breasted, hands raised, with serpents coiled of their fingers or around their bodies, those figures radiate electricity. They're not submissive idols. They're guardians of the household, fertility, and perhaps life itself. To the Minoans, snakes symbolized renewal, rebirth, and thriller, creatures of both earth and underworld. The rooms where these gadgets were determined hint at family shrines or ritual areas, quiet, sacred corners hidden a number of the palac's bustling heart. Mixed with the fresco, the horns, the altars, and the labyrinthine corridors, the whole complicated starts to sense like a ritual device, a shape built no longer only for dwelling, but for connecting with the divine. There is no centralized temple at Knossos, because the palace itself changed into a temple. Its layout, artwork, and design were all a part of a spiritual worldview in which obstacles between sacred and secular failed to exist. This was a place wherein myth became structure, in which a corridor may want to come to be a passage to the gods, and where every echo inside the stone chambers may additionally have once been a whispered prayer. Knossos did not just house people. It housed gods. For centuries, Knossos stood as a beacon of prosperity, innovation, and cultural sophistication. But then something occurred, something surprising, something no one can absolutely provide an explanation for. By around 1400 B.C., the palace became deserted, the fresco left to vanish, and the Minoan civilization that once dominated the seas had vanished like mist over the Aegean. So what came about? Theories abound. A few point to nature. Around 1600 B.C., the volcanic island of Thera, modern-day Santorini, erupted in one in every of the largest explosions in human records. The blast turned into so massive it probably brought on tsunamis that battered Crete's northern coast, devastating ports and farmland. Ash clouds might also have blocked the solar, choking plants and disrupting the weather. At the same time as Knossos wasn't at once destroyed, the aftermath of the eruption may also have shaken the rules economically, politically, and spiritually. Others appearance to war. By 1450 B.C., the growing strength of the Mycenaeans, mainland Greeks, may additionally have taken benefit of Minoan weakness. Archaeological evidence indicates Knossos turned into reoccupied in brief, however the culture had modified. The art became extra-martial. Linear A, the Minoan script, changed with Linear B, used by Mycenaean scribes. The palace that once thrived with snake goddesses and bull dancers now whispered in a foreign tongue. Some pupils believe the Mycenaeans did not invade in an unmarried conquest, but regularly absorbed the island, first through exchange, then have an effect on, and subsequently rule. Others argue that inner fall apart, a civil rebellion, political instability, or the failure of the elite may, additionally, have contributed just as a whole lot. What's striking, even though, is how little violence is obvious in the ruins. There are no charred skeletons, no signs and symptoms of mass slaughter. Knossos didn't fall with a scream. It fell with a whisper. The superb palatial gadget simply stopped. The rooms went quiet. The rituals ended, and nature slowly crept back in. By the time Homer sang of Crete in his epics, Knossos was already historic delusion, a reminiscence tangled in stories of kings, monsters, and labyrinths. And perhaps this is fitting, due to the fact what killed Knossos wasn't just eruption or invasion. It became time, and the man are all awesome things, irrespective of how stunning, in the end vanish below the load of recent empires. But the bones stay. And in case you concentrate closely, the maze nevertheless hums below the earth. For hundreds of years, Knossos lay forgotten, buried below the Cretan soil, just another mound of stone lost to time. Its call forgotten, its myths distorted, its walls swallowed by way of olive groves and dust. That is until one man decided to chase a legend. His call changed into Sir Arthur Evans. And he did not just rediscover Knossos, he reimagined it. In 1900, Evans, a British archaeologist with a flair for drama and a deep love for Homeric fable, purchased the land that covered the historical ruins. Nearby farmers have been locating peculiar seals and artifacts, clues that something full-size lay below their toes. Evans dug in. What he determined could change the records of the Aegean all the time. He uncovered a palace so massive, so complicated, and so superior that he became convinced this changed into the mythical home of King Minos. The fresco, the horns, the sheer architectural strangeness of the webpage, all of it pointed in his mind to at least one thing: the labyrinth. Evans wasn't just an archaeologist. He became a storyteller, and on occasion, an arguable one. He named the individuals who constructed Knossos the Minoans after Minos. He interpreted symbols, reconstructed fresco, and restored components of the palace, the usage of bolstered concrete, a flow that has drawn each praise and grievance. A few call it visionary, others call it vandalism. Because what you notice these days at Knossos is partly historic spoil and partially Edwardian imagination. Still, Evans did what no person else had dared. He brought Knossos again to existence. He gave Europe a glimpse into a Bronze Age global far older than classical Greece, a civilization of artwork, mystery, and maritime beauty. He also unearthed the nonetheless undeciphered Linear a script, commencing new questions about language, literacy, and the boundaries of our historic expertise. But Evans did more than excavate stone. He resurrected a fantasy and forced historians to reckon with the reality that behind the legend of the labyrinth changed into something real, something complex, something very human. A palace that felt like a maze, a civilization that slipped into shadow, and a person who peeled again the earth, only to discover a tale a long way stranger and extra lovely than he had imagined. Knossos had slept for 3,000 years. Evans rang the bell that woke it up. Walk through Knossos, and you are no longer simply strolling through structure. You are walking through a language of symbols. Fresco, carvings, patterns, they may be anywhere. But the Minoans didn't depart us a Rosetta Stone. Their number one script, Linear A, stays undeciphered. So as opposed to studying their thoughts, we need to see them painted across plaster, carved into walls and hidden in patterns. What exactly had been they trying to say? The artwork of Knossos is unlike something in the historic world. There may be no obsession with warfare, no rows of kings or battle-hardened heroes. Alternatively, we discover nature, leaping dolphins, blooming lilies, birds in flight, and sacred bulls. The human beings are alive, elegant, and frequently dancing or performing rituals. Even in scenes that suggest danger, there is rhythm and beauty. The Minoans were not chronicling conquests. They had been celebrating existence cycles and likely cosmic order. The maximum iconic image, though, is the double axe or asterisk Labrys asterisk, found at some stage in Knossos in shrines, on fresco, even etched into stones. The double axe is assumed to be a religious image, likely tied to girl divinity or celestial cycles. A few advocate the very phrase labyrinth may derive from Labrys asterisk, making the labyrinth no longer a maze at all, however a house of the double axe, a sacred space, not a lure. Then there are the horns of consecration, stylized bull horns located at top walls and altars. Those might also have been spiritual markers, separating sacred area from the mundane. Combined with common depictions of bulls and bull-leaping rituals, it is clear the animal had deep, non-secular significance. Whether or not it represented nature, fertility, chaos, or a divine presence, no one consents. But the bull is everywhere. Even the format of Knossos may additionally have symbolic, which means. A few archaeologists accept as true with it turned into constructed not just for feature, but to reflect celestial or seasonal styles. Its winding corridors and nested rooms could represent an adventure via lifestyles, through loss of life, through the underworld. A non-secular maze, no longer a physical prison. But without a deciphered script, every principle walks a thin line among insight and creativeness. The Minoans spoke in symbols, not stories. And so we're left to interpret. What is Knossos announcing? We hear the rhythms. We see the images, but that means that remains just out of reach, like a thread unraveling into fable. Knossos is a damage, sure, but it doesn't sense dead. Walk its corridors today, and you'll experience something humming just beneath the floor. Not ghosts, now not gods, but echoes of myths, of lives, of questions that refuse to head away. Lots of years after its fall, Knossos nonetheless holds us in its maze. Vacationers wander its halls, archaeologists dig for answers, and writers spin new tales inspired by using its shadow. The Minotaur may be delusion, but the feeling of the labyrinth is real. We don't know who ruled Knossos. We do not know the names of its kings, queens, or priests. We do not know the prayers they whispered, or the laws they lived by means of. But we know they cherished beauty. We recognize they worshipped nature. We recognize they understood balance between architecture and art, among ritual and truth. And we understand they were the first. Before the Parthenon, earlier than Rome, before the Hebrew temples or the Persian palaces, there was Knossos, a palace that was also a town. A metropolis that was additionally a temple. A temple that may have also been a story. due to the fact possibly that's what the labyrinth really is. Not a prison, no longer a puzzle, but a story carved in stone, a myth in architectural form. The legend of the Minotaur didn't arise from nothing. It got here from this vicinity, from the confusion of its corridors, the reverence of its bull rituals, and the awe it inspired in generations who tried to make sense of it. The Greeks grew to become it right into a tale. We grew to become it into archaeology. However, at its core, Knossos has always been both. Today, we can walk its ruins in extensive daylight hours. We can take images, draw maps, or even reconstruct its fresco. But the mystery hasn't vanished. The road between reality and legend nonetheless shimmers like warmness over stone. Maybe this is why Knossos endures, as it does not give us all of the solutions. It reminds us that now and again history isn't meant to be solved. It's intended to be felt. And Knossos, ancient, tangled, half of remembered, isn't always just an area on a map. It's a query, one that leads us deeper with each step. And like Theseus, we are all nonetheless following the thread. Historic engineers knew precisely what they had been doing. The earliest rams were handheld. Groups of soldiers certainly lifted a tree trunk and smashed it against enemy defenses like frenzied lumberjacks. But over time, the battering ram advanced. Engineers realized that mounting the ram interior a wheeled frame, frequently with a roof to shield the team from arrows and boiling oil, turned it from a device into a weapon of terror. The Assyrians, masters of siege warfare, grew to become rams into mental weapons. Their siege towers combined rams with archer structures. That means a city's gates have been being destroyed, whilst defenders had been beneath consistent hearth. Comfort carvings from Nineveh show rams, with pointed iron suggestions, rolling up to the gates of rebellious towns like slow-moving gods of destruction. And it wasn't just the front door they have been smashing. Rams have been frequently used to breach weak factors in partitions, batter down watchtowers, or crumble gatehouses completely. Their presence meant one factor: surrender or watch your defenses crumble like stale bread. The Greeks settled them. The Romans perfected them. Roman engineers constructed massive rams called asterisk ares, Latin for ram, suspended with chains or ropes inside enormous siege shelters. A few had been so large they needed dozens of fellows to operate. And the rhythm of their swinging beam became stated to sound like thunder rolling across stone. And yet, for all their brute pressure, battering rams required critical teamwork. Operators had to preserve the ram swinging in sync at the same time, as additionally protecting it from burning missiles, stones, and all way of foul materials hurled from above. A stalled ram became a dead ram. Still, when a battering ram were given going, simply going, it turned into unstoppable. Wood muscle versus human masonry. It turned into ancient physics, weaponized, and it changed into handiest the start of ways engineers might make partitions weep. If the battering ram became the brute, the catapult was the tactician. Wherein rams smashed close up, catapults attacked from a distance, launching not just stones but mental dread. They were the first real artillery pieces in Navy history, and they revolutionized siege struggle via weaponizing physics in approaches that felt almost magical to the enemy. The earliest catapults emerged from the Greek world around the 4th century B.C., a product of outstanding minds who desired to feature range and momentum to battle. Dionysius the Elder of Syracuse, a tyrant with a flavor for cutting-edge violence, commissioned the first torsion-powered catapults, gadgets that used twisted bundles of sinew or hair as tension springs. Those were not slingshots for giants. They had been specific units of siege terror. The genius lay of their mechanics. Engineers discovered that by twisting ropes tightly, often made from animal sinew, they might store giant amounts of ability electricity. When launched, this force could hurl stones, javelins, or maybe flaming projectiles hundreds of meters. The two important types developed speedy. The ballista asterisk, which released large bolts like a giant crossbow, and the stone-throwing catapult, which lobbed boulders over walls or at once at fortifications. Then got here the Roman engineers who by no means met a Greek idea they couldn't enhance. They built catapults that might be damaged down, packed onto carts, and reassembled on site. Portable siege engines for expert armies. Some Roman catapults could fire 60 lb stones at wonderful speeds, able to tearing via timber gates, battlements, and on occasion unlucky soldiers. Catapults weren't just about destruction. They had been about spectacle. Historic generals used them to send messages, now and again actually. Corpses were launched over walls to spread sickness and fear. Severed heads had been lobbed into besieged towns to shatter morale. In a single chilling case, diseased bodies have been fired into enemy territory as an early shape of biological battle. But catapults had their flaws. They have been heavy, required professional crews, and might be rendered useless by using terrible terrain. Still, when set up well, they might batter a city into submission from a secure distance. And for the first time in records, towns found out their thick stone walls failed to simply want to withstand a ram. They needed to live on the skis, due to the fact now destruction came flying. If the catapult was smart, the trebuchet changed into majestic. Towering, creaking, and terrifying, it became the undisputed king of medieval siege warfare. When one seemed at the battlefield, it wasn't just a weapon. It changed into an assertion. It said, "Your walls suggest nothing." Not like its tension-powered cousins, the trebuchet trusted gravity. At its core was an easy precept, an extended swinging arm hooked up on a strong frame with a heavy counterweight on one end and a sling on the other. Raise the load, let it drop, and the arm could whip round, flinging the sling and its deadly payload in an excessive arc over enemy defenses. It changed into managed destruction, particular, predictable, and devastating. The beginning of the trebuchet can be traced back to early traction fashions, used by the Chinese language as early as the 4th century B.C., wherein manpower replaced counterweights. But the counterweight trebuchet, the version that would rewrite siege warfare in Europe and the Islamic world, emerged within the 12th century, possibly through Byzantine or Muslim intermediaries. Once Europe got its palms at the design, it unfolded like wildfire via castles and crusades. The electricity becomes spectacular. A well-built trebuchet could launch 300 lb projectiles over 300 m. Stones the size of furnishings could crash into towers, pulverize partitions, or crater enemy morale. However, the actual magic turned into in the arc. Unlike catapults, trebuchets may want to hurl projectiles over partitions with finesse. This meant they weren't simply smashing defenses. They were hitting courtyards, barracks, and deliver depots' interior. And it wasn't just stones. Trebuchets hurled everything: diseased animals, burning pitch, pots of lime to blind defenders, even messages or insults wrapped around rocks. One legendary account from the siege of Stirling Castle in Scotland tells of Warwolf, a trebuchet so large that the enemy surrendered before it became even fired. The king refused to simply accept the give up just so he may want to check the device. However, for all its unfavorable glory, the trebuchet wasn't fast. It took hours to construct, minutes to reload, and demanded skilled engineers. Still, no other siege weapon blended variety, pressure, and psychological horror quite like it. It became the medieval version of a slow-motion hammer from the heavens. And when that counterweight dropped, cities held their breath. While catapults released from afar and battering rams smashed the gates, siege towers took an extra personal approach. They rolled right up to the enemy's the front door and dropped off armed invaders. Consider a timber skyscraper on wheels covered in moist hides to save you fire, bristling with archers and spearmen. That turned into the siege tower, the ancient equivalent of an armored personnel carrier and a mobile castle in one. And when one of those started rumbling closer to your town walls, you knew that the actual combat turned into approximately to begin. Siege towers were not diffused. They have been huge, ambitious, and terrifyingly effective whilst used well. The Assyrians may additionally were the various first to install them within the 9th century B.C. But it was the Greeks, and in particular the Hellenistic kingdoms, that took the layout to theatrical extremes. During the siege of Rhodes in 305 B.C., the Macedonian fashionable Demetrius built a 9-story tower referred to as the Helepolis, or taker of cities. It became over 100 feet tall, equipped with catapults, blanketed in iron plates, and moved through hundreds of squaddies. It also broke below its very own weight, but the ambition was unequaled. The common sense behind siege towers became simple: walls handiest work in case you cannot recover from them. Siege towers removed that benefit by creating an elevated platform from which attackers should descend onto the battlements, bypassing gates and scaling ladders. From the top deck, archers should rain demise down onto defenders, whilst troops on the lower stages organized to board. But these towers were not invincible. They have been sluggish, prone to mud, and prime targets for defenders with fireplace arrows, rolling boulders, or even sabotaged terrain. Smart defenders could dig ditches, flood moats, or build secondary inner partitions, called counter-scarp defenses, just to stop a tower's method. Still, after they labored spectacularly. A breach inside the wall became one element. However, having your very own rampart all of a sudden crowded with enemy soldiers, that turned into chaos. Siege towers transformed the battlefield from a horizontal contest of power to a vertical race for survival. They made peak an asset and a legal responsibility. And as soon as the crew plank dropped from a siege tower to the metropolis walls, there was no turning lower back. It changed into time for hand-to-hand hell. At the same time as rams smashed and trebuchets soared, some of the most devastating siege methods occurred silently underground. Siege tunneling or sapping turned into the dark artwork of defeating a city by means of eliminating the floor it stood on. Literally. The idea was ancient and horrifyingly powerful. Dig under the enemy's wall, prop it up with wood supports, then set those helps on fireplace. Whilst the timbers burned away, the tunnel collapsed, taking the muse of the wall with it. One moment your town stood strong. The subsequent, a massive segment of the outer wall crumbled like stale bread. This technique failed to look glorious. There were no grand engines or thunderous launches. However, tunneling was the sluggish, invisible killer of castle battle. The Assyrians practiced early variations of it. However, the method reached complete adulthood with the Greeks, Persians, and later medieval EU armies. During the siege of Plataea in 429 B.C., the Spartans tried tunneling beneath the walls, most effective for the defenders to dig counter-tunnels and intercept them mid-dig, turning the soil right into a knife combat nightmare. This shielding tactic have become known as countermining, and it brought an eerie element to siege war. Imagine squatties digging in pitch black, loads of toes below the earth, listening for the sound of enemy selections. The moment they heard tapping, that they had raced to intercept, regularly resulting in violent, claustrophobic skirmishes fought by way of torchlight with knives and shovels. There was no glory in it, just terror, suffocation, and dirt. However, when undermining labored, the results have been catastrophic. One of the most notorious examples came in 1215, all through the siege of Rochester Castle in England. King John's forces tunneled under the southern wall, packed the mine with pig fats, and set it ablaze. The helps collapsed, bringing down the entire tower above. The defenders had been shocked and soon after surrendered. By the 13th century, siege engineers have become experts in identifying vulnerable foundations, measuring the soil's conduct, and planning collapses with terrifying precision. They have been geologists and demolitionists rolled into one. And although tunneling required time, labor, and a chunk of insanity, it proved one truth approximately siege conflict. In case you couldn't cross over the wall and you could not undergo it, you may constantly take it down from underneath. Not all the drama of siege warfare got here from the attackers. For each ram constructed or tower rolled ahead, defenders had their very own deadly tricks. And occasionally, the one's tricks were hot. Permits begin with the most terrifying of them all, Greek fire. Developed via the Byzantine, across the 7th century C. Greek hearth was a mysterious, napalm-like substance that could stick to ships, partitions, and flesh, and saved burning even on water. Sprayed from siphons or hurled in clay pots, it created scenes of natural chaos. To nowadays, nobody is aware of precisely how it became made. The method was so mystery that it died with the empire, but its effects were legendary. Entire fleets have been reduced to flaming skeletons inside minutes. And that turned into just the begin. In more low-tech defenses, boiling beverages were the go-to guns of desire. Boiling water, oil, or sand could be poured from murder holes, those quaint openings within the ceilings of gateways or towers, at once onto invaders below. Oil was especially feared. In contrast to water, it clung to skin, soaking into garments and armor before being set alight. Consider mountain climbing a siege ladder, most effective to be greeted with hearth. You can never positioned out. Hot sand, even though much less dramatic, was vicious in its very own right. It'd slip into the gaps of armor, especially around the neck or wrists, causing 2D and 0.33 diploma burns as it cooked the flesh underneath. It did an appearance marvelous from a distance. However, it became formidable warriors into screaming wrecks in seconds. Defenders also depended on the good old legal guidelines of physics. Gravity became a weapon. Giant stones, logs, or even dead animals were dropped from parapets onto siege engines or dense formations of troops. The intention wasn't simply to kill. It became to break the machines and morale right now. And then there have been traps, hidden pits, collapsing bridges, spiked barricades. Castles have become puzzles of ache, designed to slow, confuse, and punish. All of this served one motive: put off. Every minute a wall held was a minute toward enemy deliver lines running thin, to ailments spreading in camps, or to reinforcements arriving. Siege battle changed into a recreation of attrition. And even as the attackers had physics on their aspect, the defenders had creativity and an entire lot of boiling rage. In siege war, uncooked destruction changed into handiest half of the intention. The opposite one too became psychological domination, breaking the desire of the defenders earlier than the walls even came down. Siege weapons were not just tools of war. They have been big, creaking, flaming symbols of doom. Each groaning wheel of a siege tower, every arcing boulder flung by a trebuchet changed into, designed to plant one seed in the minds of these in the back of the walls. You are not safe. Historical commanders knew this. The Assyrians paraded their siege engines overtly, dragging them across deserts with grand fanfare. The Romans built their siege camps proper in view of the enemy, letting defenders watch as battering rams were assembled and catapults examined. Siege became theater, and worry was a part of the script. Now and then the payloads themselves carried a message. Severed heads of messengers or generals could be released over the walls, regularly nonetheless wearing their armor. On the siege of Constantinople, defenders had been bombarded not most effective with rocks, but with our bodies. Diseased corpses released to spread panic and plague. For the duration of the Mongol siege of Kaffa in 1346, it is believed that hurling plague-inflamed corpses over the walls helped cause outbreaks of the Black Demise in Europe. The trebuchet wasn't only a weapon. It was a statement. While such a giant's changed into rolled into place, everyone within the fortress ought to pay attention it earlier than they saw it. The creaking of winches, the grinding of ropes, the heavy thunk of the counterweight like the heartbeat of an incoming typhoon. But the maximum risky element, the unknown. You never knew what became coming subsequent. Would it be a rock, a barrel of fireplace, a rain of arrows, or just silence? Ominous, heavy silence as engineers adjusted their intention. Even the sounds have become mental guns. The rhythmic thump of a battering ram or the surprising silence before a shot could power defenders mad with anticipation. For commanders, the aim changed into to create despair, to convince the enemy that resistance become useless, that their gods had abandoned them, that their walls were not anything however brief limitations inside the path of fate. And when that mental dam finally cracked, the gates often opened without a combat, due to the fact in siege warfare, every so often the mind collapsed before the masonry. As gunpowder thundered onto the battlefield in the overdue medieval era, the age of traditional siege engines came to a sluggish, splintering give up, but their legacy did not vanish. It evolved. The discovery of cannons changed the whole lot. A single properly positioned shot from a cannon could do in seconds what a trebuchet took hours to attain. Stone walls, once considered impenetrable, became liabilities. Via the 15th century, the tremendous castles of Europe were crumbling, not from undermining or fire, but from iron balls crashing through their parapets. Siege struggle had entered its next segment, explosive, brutal, and deafening. And yet, the standards laid down by means of historic siege engineers in no way disappeared. Current artillery still owes a debt to the catapult and trebuchet. Every ballistic missile and long-variety howitzer is only a high-tech descendant of the same question. How do you smash what's supposed to be unbreakable from a distance? Physics, trajectory, tension, and force, all determined, examined, and perfected centuries before gunpowder ever entered the tale. Even military psychology today, shock and awe, overwhelming firepower, visible dominance, has its roots in ancient siege processes. Those towering siege engines rolling forward with flags snapping inside the wind were the unique shock and awe. They were not just about breaching a wall. They had been approximately breaking the spirit of a metropolis. You may nevertheless see their legacy etched into the ruins of historical towns. At Masada, in which Roman siege ramps nonetheless scar the barren region. At Constantinople, wherein layers of partition stood for 1,000 years against each system conceivable, until cannon hearth sooner or later brought them down. At castles across Europe, where spherical towers and angled bastions tell the tale of a global continuously remodeling itself to survive the following siege. And today, even in a world of drones and satellite-guided missiles, siege battle hasn't vanished. It is just long past virtual. Cities are nevertheless surrounded. Defenders are nevertheless isolated. Walls at the moment are firewalls, blockades, or maybe media blackouts. But the soul of the siege remains the identical. Someone wants in. Someone wants to hold them out. And both are inclined to attend, build, and smash to win. The battering rams are gone. The trebuchets are museum portions. However, the spirit of siege warfare, it's as alive and as detrimental as ever.